I'd been a Christian my whole life, and I'd considered myself a scholar. And I decided to start calling to him on every verse. I would read a verse. I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean?
Shalom, Eliorah.
Shalom, Rav Moshe.
Welcome to the Noahide Academy podcast. I want to ask you a few questions today. If you could share with us what inspired you and your family to leave Christianity and convert to Judaism, and what were the key moments or realizations that led you to this profound decision?
Oh, wow. Okay. It started a long time ago, and it took us many years to get to the place of conversion. So I had left the church when my children were small, and I was teaching in a private Christian school, a fundamental Baptist school. And it was also the kind of school I went to. And my children were there, and I used to get up early every morning and learn. And there's a pasuk that says in Yirmiyahu that says, "Call to me, and I will answer you and show you things you do not know." So I took it very seriously. I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning so I could be up well before my children and have time alone with God. And so after I read that, I realized, I'm like, even though I'd been a Christian my whole life, and I'd considered myself a scholar, and I decided to start calling to him on every verse. I would read a verse. I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And he would show me. And there were two verses that really stand out to me. And when I came across it, it said that I'm just paraphrasing this pasuk, and it goes, "At the end of time, the nations will come to God, and they will say, 'Hey, we've inherited lies from our fathers and things that are not true.'" And I said, "Hey, have I inherited lies and things that are not true?" And Hashem said, "Well, be careful what you ask for." And then there was another verse that said that at the end of time, 10 men from every nation will grab hold of the corners of a Jewish man's cloak, and said that, "We want to go with you because God is with you." And I was aware that the tzitzis, which represent the commandments, were on the corners of a Jewish man's cloak. And I'm like, wow, the commandments. And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. And so I just started asking. These verses would not leave me alone. And I continually asked Hashem. And it was he just showed me, the first thing he showed me was that the Torah was forever. And I can actually thank King David for that, because it was when I was reading the Psalms that I saw in the Psalms how the Torah is perfect. There's nothing wrong with the Torah. Why would the Torah be done away with? And so these things that did not jive with the Christian doctrines just would not leave me alone. And when I realized that Torah is forever and that the church is in error, I went to my pastor. I went to the school principal, because I worked at the school. And I'm like, and everybody thought I had lost my mind. And so slowly, I'm like, well, I didn't, there were so many things I did not know. I really had no clue. But I'm like, okay, so I just took what Christians call the Old Testament, the Torah, and I said, okay, and it was coming up on Sukkot, and it said, we called it in the Christian world the Feast of Tabernacles, and it said that you're to go out into a temporary dwelling for 7 days. And I looked at my little children, and I said, okay, kids, we've got this. And we went out, we put up a tent under a tree. We didn't have the oral doors. I put up a 3-room tent under a tree, and we camped for a whole week. And I told the school, it's like, oh, I can't work because God wants us to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, and we should be doing this, because I did not know. And I took it very literally, and I was trying to do everything that it said. And the kids had a great time that week. And then it snowed. and we camped in the snow. We had every blanket in the house. The kids had the best time, and we tried to keep Shabbos. It's very funny stories until I left the church, but it was a
And
long journey.
how old were you?
At that time, so I can remember because my daughter, who is now 24, she was 4 years old when it started. It was
Okay.
she was 4 years old. She was in the 4-year-olds at the Christian school, and I'd left when she turned 5. I'd actually pulled the kids out of the school for the following year, and I homeschooled the kids for the rest of their years after that. And from there, it was a slow process until we finally we didn't start the conversion to Judaism process until the children were like high school.
Okay. And where were you exactly?
Indiana.
In Indiana.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So let me ask you another question, Eliorah. What challenges did you and your family face during the conversion process, both emotionally and practically? And how did your faith and support from the community help you overcome these obstacles?
Wow. I think if I had more time to answer that, I might be able to get deeper. But right off the top of my head, I think the biggest challenges really was my extended family, my parents, and they're Baptists, and uh, it was very hard on them. It was very hard on them. It was very, even though they saw this happening for years, because, when on my way out of the church, I was like, I wouldn't do Halloween. I wouldn't do Easter. I wouldn't let my kids do, my family did an Easter egg hunt for like generations. That was a part of it. And I said, no, my kids, we can't do that. And so I changed the whole thing to like a freedom festival, because I was very sensitive to like avodah zarah, to idolatry, and there was idolatrous practices in the church. The ones that were most obvious to me, like involving Christmas and Halloween. Like the church used to celebrate Halloween. I think they've gotten away from that in the last several years, but at that time period, they were. So it was kind of that process. And so my parents, it wasn't such a surprise. I started learning Hebrew, and so when my kids were little, so when it came to time, I don't know, was it 2000? I'd been talking about it for years, 2014, when finally, after all those years, I'm like, I'm going to convert to Judaism. They were kind of like, they just never believed I was actually going to do it. And so that was very difficult for them. It was hard. It was a big change because I didn't want to be at their house for Christmas. I didn't participate in family things, and I could not eat my mother's food. My mother's a wonderful cook, and even though for years, as I was slowly learning, I didn't know anything about kashrut. I mean, our first thing was just to not eat pork and shellfish. We stopped that years ago, but I didn't know anything about kashrut. So I would eat my mother's food, and to help accommodate us, she would not serve pork or shellfish for us. But then when I learned about actual kashrut and I got the oral Torah during my conversion process, I wouldn't eat her food at all. And I say that's the hardest part. And then there's the personal part. The personal part, and Rabbi Tovi Singer says this. It takes, I heard him one time say, it takes like 10 years to get the zoyama. I don't know how to translate that into English, but there's like this stench of the snake that is on people who are not connected to Yiddishkeit, who are not Jews. I don't want to be offensive or anything, but it's there. It's real. I know. I experienced it. So there was this cleansing process of my neshama, and it's painful. It's real. And it was a process of removing, even though it had been so many years, I'd been slowly coming out and getting all of these things off of me. But there is, like in Judaism, for example, there's the machitza between men and women. In the non-Jewish world, there's not so much mechitza at all. There's not such a separation. There is, especially in our generation, there is a friendliness, and men and women, they shake hands, they pat each other on the back. They have conversations. And in Judaism, there is a purity and a wholesomeness where it's not acceptable. We don't do that in Judaism, and it's pure, and I don't know if I can explain that well, but that was something for me to learn. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't like, oh, this is hard for me. It was just, I did not know so many things. I did not know coming into Judaism that I had to purify myself from. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Eliorah. If you allow me to add a little bit of resolution into what you just described, the Zohama is the spirit of impurity that came down to the world at the moment of the eating of the Eitz HaChaim, actually the Eitz Hadat Tov Ra, and it takes 7 years. 7 years to renew the materiality of the body biologically, to eat kosher for the entirety of the body to be renewed completely, to have only kosher molecules in its body, even though it's a parallel process to other levels of the conversion. But I have another question for you, if you allow me. Thank you for that. Now that you and your family are living in Jerusalem on Mount Zion, where you are talking from, how has this experience been for you? And what aspects of the Jewish life and culture in Jerusalem have had the most significant impact on your spiritual and personal growth?
Wow. It's really dramatic. It's extremely dramatic. I lived in Sfat for three years, and the change that I experienced from moving to Indiana to Sfat was huge. Sfat was so healing and so purifying for me. I grew so much in Sfat. And then when I came to Jerusalem, I skyrocketed even higher and faster. And it is Jerusalem, the Kedusha here is palpable. And it's palpable in Sfat. And I remember when I was living in Sfat, my children had just moved, because 2 out of 3 of my children converted, and all my children are married. And so my married daughter who converted, she lived in Jerusalem at the time. And when she and her husband came into my house in Sfat, I looked at them. I could see it's hard. It sounds crazy, but you develop a sensitivity to it. I could feel it. The Kedusha on the kids. They brought Jerusalem in with them. And I looked at them like, whoa, I can see it. I can feel it. I want that. And so every time I would come to Jerusalem, I'm like, whew, I could feel it. And then, Hashem opened a door for me to move here, and Baruch Hashem, I can feel it when I leave. I can feel going down a little bit when I leave. It's just real.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Eliorah, for your testimonial here today. I really appreciate that, you sharing the depths of your challenges and the struggle and the courage to do the right decisions. And I hope that Bezat Hashem, next week we'll have a new podcast with you to inspire other people around the world to see the beauty of Judaism and the light of Torah and the truth. And now it's definitely time that we all get together in Jerusalem in the third temple and we celebrate for 1,000 years. So thank you, Eliorah, and I hope to see you next week, Bezat Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you, Reb Moshe. Bezrat Hashem.
If you like these videos, please like, share, and subscribe.